Rice Warner has just released a landmark report on self-managed super funds to update a report it released back in 2013. So what's changed since then? Meg Heffron, Director of Heffron SMSF Solutions, joins us now for some analysis. Hi, Meg.
Hi, Tracy.
Did this report surprise you, or did it reinforce what you'd thought for quite some time?
Look, it probably told me what I think most of us working in the SMSF industry would have expected. So to that extent, it didn't surprise me in that, it found, broadly speaking, that SMSFs are cheaper than people think, that they're competitive at much lower thresholds than relative to APRA funds than people think. I think what surprised me was the sort of level of depth of the analysis, which was actually really important. So I'm very glad Rice Warner did all that. But yeah, the end conclusion probably won't surprise many people in that work in SMSFs.
So is there a magic number where self-managed super funds work much better than the APRA regulated funds?
So I hate magic numbers, and look, I hate magic numbers because they assume that you can reduce everything to one number. If you had to pick a magic number, Rice Warner said over 500,000 SMSFs are almost universally cheaper than the alternative types of funds. So I guess that's to some degree a magic number. It's a safe number. But they had other magic numbers in their report. Between 250 and 500, SMSFs were at least competitive and often cheaper. So but I do hate magic numbers because I think one of the things that's really special about SMSFs is the people who have them make an enormous number of choices about what they want to invest in, how much work they want to do themselves, what advice they need, all that kind of stuff. And so all of those factors influence how much it's going to cost you to run your SMSF. So in a way, saying the magic number is 500 is a little bit like saying cars cost $20,000. They don't, but of course you can get a car for $20,000.
Yeah, they are very individual decisions, but it seems like the advice has changed over a number of years. For example, ASIC was suggesting for quite some time that self-managed super funds with balances below $500,000 have lower returns after expenses and tax and, quote, will often be uncompetitive compared with APRA-regulated funds. Has that been changed once and for all now?
I hope so, because I think that rhetoric was actually quite misleading. Ignore my purist's view that you can't reduce everything to a magic number. If you are going to use a magic number, you should at least use a magic number that isn't misleading. So I think a couple of things have changed. The world has changed in the last 7 years. So Rice Warner did this report that did a version of this 7 years ago, and in that time, even they found that costs have come down. So the world has changed. But secondly, I think when ASIC were relying on figures from the ATO, which whilst totally accurate, were not helpful at all. Initially, APRA talked in terms of averages. I'm an actuary, so I can't help myself getting nerdy. Averages are terrible. You should at least look at medians. When the ATO gave medians, the number came down. Even medians, though, you're looking at a huge universe with very different choices being made. If you want to know how much an SMSF is going to cost for you, you need to find the population of people who look like you and look at the sort of average or median for them. So I think, yeah, the world has changed, but also the quality of magic numbers we're choosing is just better this time.
That is a big difference mathematically. Thank you for explaining that so clearly. What about the time taken to manage an SMSF compared with another fund? Does that make it less attractive, or again, is it an individual thing?
Look, everything's an individual thing, but I think you can probably make a couple of observations about time. Some people, and funnily enough, we did a little survey of our own client base. So we look after about 4,000 SMSFs. We did a little survey of our own client base. Now, obviously not all of those 4,000 people responded, but we got some really interesting results. So a large part of our client base has an advisor. Not surprisingly, those people reported spending very little time on their SMSF. They're buying a full service administration service from us, and they have an advisor. Those are the people who spend the least amount of time on their SMSF, and they were reporting less than an hour a month. At the other end, we have a lot of people who are doing everything themselves, and they spend more like, a couple of hours a week. Now, that variation is enormous. If you're doing everything yourself, including managing your own investments, and you've got millions of dollars, I'd be flabbergasted if you could manage all the research you need to do, all the, reading, following markets, whatever those people do. I don't know anything about investments, so that's not I'm not in that category. But it must turn into almost a sort of a component of their job to actually manage their portfolio. But if you have a couple of $1 million, so you should be, in a way, either you should be paying someone to do that for you, or you should expect to spend a lot of time on it yourself. It's an enormous asset. Think about how much time we all spend on yard work protecting our other big asset, our home. It doesn't surprise me particularly that some people spend an awful lot of time on their SMSF where they're doing all that work themselves. But the key there is the variability. So sure, if you want to have an SMSF and you want to pay somebody else to do most of the work, you will spend very little time on it. If you don't want to pay someone else to do the work and you wanted to do it yourself, you will spend a lot more time on it. And that could be, several hours a week. And what's really interesting is I wonder if I had a couple of $1 million in an APRA fund, I wonder if I wouldn't be doing the same thing. If I have a couple of $1 million, aren't I interested in learning about what tax planning strategies there are? What should I be doing with my super? Which of the various options or investments in that APRA fund should I be picking? I'd probably be spending quite a bit of time on it anyway, even if it was in an APRA fund. The fact that it's in an SMSF isn't the thing that's necessarily driving some of that time. Of course, some of the work by definition is being done by the APRA fund, so I wouldn't need to do all that. But geez, you'd hope that somebody with a couple of $1 million anywhere is thinking hard about how they want to manage that, or how they want someone else to manage it for them.
Aside from the real or perceived opportunity cost when it comes to time, which this report did touch on, it also mentioned the safety aspect around APRA-regulated funds, because by their very nature, they are regulated. Are SMSFs any less safe?
So there's probably one really big difference, and it's important. If something goes terribly wrong in an SMSF, you don't have access to the complaints authorities that you do in an APRA fund. And so we've seen examples of that when particular investments that have been marketed very heavily to SMSFs have gone belly up, and the SMSFs, really the only way they can pursue that is through the courts. So that is a big deal. I guess you've got to weigh that up against how valuable is it to you. So my SMSF, for example, is pretty simple. It's got some managed funds, some shares. I don't have anything particularly unusual. My need for that complaints process is probably pretty modest. I'm looking after it myself with an advisor and an accountant. If they do the dirty on me, I'll have to sue them. But it's I think to say they're not safe implies that there's some rogue element potentially nicking all your money, and I think that's probably overstating the difference between APRA and SMSF funds.
Meg Heffron, thanks so much for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me.